Well, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining, and thank you for all the wonderful people at Chakruna organizing this event. It is really, this is no exaggeration to say, this is a tremendous pleasure to be able to welcome Didier Lacaze to this event. Didier Lacaze lived in the Peruvian Amazon from 1983 to 1999, and I heard about him before I met him. I went to the Peruvian Amazon in 1986 for the first time. I was 20 years old, and Didier was already a legend in the region. This was before the sort of major ayahuasca tourism was going on, but there were certain seekers traveling around the Peruvian Amazon, experimenting with ayahuasca, learning things, and there were lots of those people around. But the Indians in Madre de Dios, in the Peruvian Amazon, Madre de Dios region, they said, Didier is the real thing. He's this French guy, and he is the real thing. He's a real shaman. He's studied with the Shipibos, and the Shipibos are like the most respected shamans in the Amazon. And so I'd already heard about Didier. He was organizing this wonderful project with his Lacaze called Ametra 2001, reviving indigenous knowledge of plants in the Madre de Dios region. And so I heard about him first, and then a few years later, I finally met him, and when we became friends. And my first ayahuasca experience was with Didier and his Shipibo instructor way back when in 1987. And so it's really a pleasure to welcome Didier here after so many years. I haven't seen him since he left Peru. So Didier lived in Peru until 1999. As I mentioned, he worked on this wonderful project, Metra 2001, from 1985 to 1991. And he then moved to the Ucayali region from 1995 to 1999. He'd been working with the Shipibo Kanibu people since the 80s. And then he went to live with the Shipibo Kanibu to further his shamanic initiation training. And then in 2000, he moved to Ecuador to work with the Shuar Federation, where and since 2003 until 2018, he's been based in the Puyo Pastaza region, and he continues to work in the subject of indigenous health. He created a program called Prometra, sort of like Ametra in Peru, with the indigenous peoples and government on intercultural health in Ecuador. And his wife, Rosa Canelos, and him founded in 2018 the foundation called Sachawarmi. And now he's working with a Quechua organization called Pueblo Ancestral Quechua on a project called Sachataki, Voices and Songs of the Forest. And so with that, I pass the word over to Didier Lacaze, my old friend and one of the truly great and early foreign ayahuasca shamans in the Amazon. And it's really a pleasure to see you again and to welcome you to this event.
Oh, thank you very much, Glenn. And hello, everybody. I'm sorry, we just had some rain fall now, so I'm not sure if you're hearing in the background the rainfall, but this is the rainforest, so it's a welcome.
Maybe just when you speak, just get a little closer to the computer. It'll help. Yeah.
Okay.
That helps a lot.
I hope the rain refreshes a bit, everybody, and I'm going to speak about this idea project of re-evaluating the traditional indigenous health systems in the Amazon. So the first thing I'd like to ask this question: why do we speak about re-evaluation, reclaiming, revitalization? Well, perhaps this is because something from the past we've left behind, the indigenous people have left behind. I think we've all left something important behind us. And the idea would be to look back into the past and see what would be those valuable things we've left behind and that could help us perhaps to live better in the world today. It has also been assumed that by reevaluating traditional indigenous systems, the health situation, it would contribute to improve the health situation of indigenous people. So my first question is, have this project, traditional medicine and others, have and the related political processes that have also come together, have they actually helped to achieve the results that indigenous people and other people expected? I personally doubt that they have. And what I'm interested in is to understand better why that is. And from that understanding, perhaps new possibilities might arise. It's difficult to summarize 35 years of work in the Amazon, so I decided to tell you a short story, the story of a young indigenous man. His name is Carlitos. His story may provide this better understanding that we're looking for to the topic of this presentation, and perhaps give us a few interesting lessons. I would like to clarify also that the story I'm about to tell you in the first person brings together things that I have seen, I have witnessed, and even participated in, and which I've put together here in a single account. So please relax and listen to the story of Carlos. Many years ago, a gringo came to our village. He spoke in good terms about our culture, particularly our traditional medicine. He wanted to help with the project because he said that we, indigenous people, are forgetting our traditional knowledge and practices. Since our representative organization had given its authorization for the project, and as my people kind of liked what the gringo was saying, they also agreed to the project. I was designated to be the health promoter of the village. We were trained during several workshops. It was good to exchange our knowledge about medicinal plants with other people from different indigenous groups. We learned different ways to prepare herbal medicine and treat the different illnesses and diseases our people suffered from. We created medicinal plant gardens in our villages. I particularly like when we talked about the traditional knowledge of our elders and the ways they understood the causes of many of these illnesses and how they treated them. Through the project, we also built an ethnobiological center with members of other villages. Some shamans from our people, were trained by other indigenous shamans from another region. Many more things were done at the center, and we felt very good about what was happening in terms of reevaluating our traditional medicine, and we were it all. But that was many years ago. And unfortunately, after 10 years, the project came to an end. The health promoters went back to their occupations. The medicinal plant garden vanished. Some of us continued to practice with our families and friends. As for the ethnobiological center, it became a jungle lodge where the shamans trained by the project ended up offering ayahuasca sessions to the tourists. Because I was interested to know how similar projects were doing, I traveled to other regions and made contact with other indigenous organizations. One day I attended a meeting where European founders had come to evaluate a health project which had been going on for 1 year. After several hours of discussions, Pablo, the health secretary of the indigenous organization, raised his arm to ask a question. I want to ask if someone can tell me what means salud, health. Because you see, when we have a drink with our friends, we say salud, to your health. Oh, and another thing, added Pablo, can someone explain to me exactly what means the word project? Well, you can imagine how the funders kind of had this amazed look at those questions. Because shamanic traditions were considered on the decline, this project had proposed to select a number of people, young people, 20 people, who were selected as candidates to train with the elders as apprentices. After 1 year of the 20 selected candidates, sorry, the light is not very good. Okay. Of the 20 selected candidates, only 2 were still actively learning. What happened? Asked one of the European funders. As no one responded to the question, an old man sitting close by asked permission to speak and said, "You see, the problem is that the leaders of the organization have selected the apprentices without really asking us, the elders, what we thought about the project, or if the young people selected were going to really learn. Because if they had asked us, we would have told them that most were not, because according to our knowledge, we know who are the ones who can learn and who are those who cannot." After the meeting ended, I asked Johnny, one of the true survivors of the project, why he decided to take on this shamanic training. He answered, "Well, you know, I signed up because I saw my uncle, who is a shaman, he was making a lot of money working with the tourists. On another occasion, I traveled further up north to meet with the leaders of another organization, and I heard a conversation between Ricardo and Armando, who had just been elected as members of the board of this organization. They were kind of arguing about their role in the organization, what they were going to do, what they were supposed to do. So Ricardo asked his friend Armando, "What do you think we should do, Armando?" "Well, I think we have to do a project," said Ricardo. "Yes, but what kind of project are we going to do?" said Armando. "It doesn't matter," Armando said. "Let's just do a project, any project." I think so. That's how I began to sense that this was difficult for some of our people to understand what these health projects or these health ideas or other projects were really about. They somehow did not always know or understood why these white folks, outsiders, wanted us to do those things. But they thought it was a good thing because it would bring something for the organization or for themselves. That is how I think projects slowly have become part of some sort of local economy, both for the organization to sustain itself, as for potential benefits or for some individuals. So I continued traveling and meeting with other people and organizations to find out more about this subject. I met Mary, who was one of the very few women health promoters. I asked her how she was doing with her project. She said, "Well, you know, Carlos, that one of our commitments is to share the knowledge, the experience we have acquired during the workshops with our community. But you know, this is difficult because when the project supervisor comes and he asks the people if the promoter has come to talk to the people, he keeps it all for himself and his family. But you know, Mary, so that's one of the reasons, Carlos, that the health promoter, and another thing, when we talk to people, actually, they don't even want to listen to us. And some even gossip that we are learning to do witchcraft. So that's one of the reasons, Carlos, that the health promoter usually don't last for long. They're constantly replaced. People of the project ask us why this is, and we tell them, well, it is because our people want to give a chance to all to learn. During several years, Carlos visited many different of these health projects and wondered why the conditions of life of these people did not seem to have improved. When I asked him what he thought about this, he said, "What seems to happen," Carlos said, "is that you, the gringos, people from outside, maybe well-intentioned, come to us with some interesting idea and present them to our people, thinking that it's a good thing for them. Although our people do not quite understand it all, for some reason of their own, they approve it. That's why they do not really identify or appropriate a project as if it was something of their own. And that ultimately is a good part of the reason why once the outside financial and technical support ends, the project ends with it all and goes back, and everything goes back to what it was before. Many years have gone by since this all started, and despite all the money invested in project, all the good things people may have tried to do, all the rights that we've been given, I feel a bit sad to see how little of all this my people enjoy today in the communities. I think our worst disease is the loss of our dignity and the increasing poverty we continue to live in. So this was the story of Carlos, and there are many more stories. I could tell you about what happened during 35 years I worked along with Indigenous people on this goal for the reevaluation of traditional medicine. In the story of Carlos, I try to highlight a few pointers which I think can help us to learn more of the lesson that these may teach us. So I would like to ask three questions first. Again, my first question would be, how can the general conditions of life of Indigenous people really improve? Can this be done just by supporting spiritual traditions, Indigenous health and medicine systems? How can we ensure as much as possible that what we give back is what people really want or need? I think it might be worth asking ourselves to how and where do those ideas and proposals to reevaluate Indigenous health systems really come from. Well, we know that in 1978, the World Health Organization finally recognized the importance of traditional medicine, proposed to implement traditional primary health care, that this was supposed to integrate medicine plans, local knowledge, and human resources, which actually did not really happen. I mean, did those ideas came from Indigenous people? Did well-intentioned? Was it a combination of both? But the fact is that our modern cultures have extracted, distilled, sacred plants are something, plants are part of something, I believe, much larger. They were, and maybe still are, for some people, life. I believe that traditional medicine is a way of life. It is a way of life that connected with all the other parts of the manifestation. But our modern cultures have extracted, have distilled these parts to obtain what they thought was useful for them. So I think if we really want to help Indigenous people to really improve their current life conditions, we need to rethink how to reintegrate these parts into the whole of their life. What this means from a practical point of view is to address not just health or healthcare, not just spiritual traditions, not just sacred plants, not just Indigenous rights, but life in general, life as a whole. This means the protection and the defense of the land, the culture, education, health, social services, economy, governance, conservation of the natural resources, and so on. I'm going to close this presentation now, and just by telling you that after 35 years, I'm not sure if I've myself learned all the lessons and find really way to work with Indigenous people on this goal of improving their life condition. There are many forces, powerful forces at play that are not particularly in favor of that. So what we're currently trying to do with this group that Glenn mentioned in the Curaray region of eastern Ecuador, of western Ecuador, is through an initiative we call Voices and Songs of the Forest, biocultural heritage of the people of Kausaksacha, the living forest. And basically, this project is about ensuring that this extraordinary symphony of life, which emanates from the rainforest, continues to exist and sound as much from nature as from culture. Because culture and nature are a unicity. They should not be separated. They should be reunited. So if you'd like more information on the work that we do, I invite you to visit the website of this Quechua organization, www.pakks.org.ec. And I think you have a website posted on the Chakruna information list. So thank you very much to Chakruna, to Bia, and to Joe, and other people who have made this possible. I think it's a very important initiative that you have created for people to know more about sacred medicine, where they come from, the cultures they are associated with, and the situation that these indigenous culture live in different parts of the Amazon. What I've been talking about may not be happening the same way in different parts. Again, as I say, this is an experience that I have tried to summarize in a little short story. I hope that this may have been an interesting story for you. So thank you very much. Thank you, Glenn.
Yes, that was a very interesting story. And I think those of us who work in the Amazon have come across stories like this where the concept of the project it's this completely foreign concept of capturing. You have to do. The gringos have something. They've got money and they want us to do something. We're not sure quite what it is, but let's just figure out what it is so we can get the benefits from it. And when there's not that sort of long-term commitment to the region and to goals, these projects tend to sort of throw up. They throw up a building. They'll throw up toilets. They'll throw up something, and then it'll stay for a few years and then goes away. And it's really is the challenge of staying with it. And I think you've shown through your 35 years in the Amazon how the only way to have any hope of success is to really stick with it and not just come have a good idea and disappear. I think there's at this point so many communities that have these experiences of someone who shows up and has a great idea and then disappears, and they can even be a little bit skeptical at times, like, oh, there's another gringo with a good idea, how long will they last? So it's rare to find people like you who really dedicate their lives to the cause and stay through with it. And people like you who've seen all of these projects come and go and fail tend to be a bit cynical about it because you sort of seen the cycle before, and know that it's much harder to bring about real change than just having a good idea. So there's a couple of questions. People are asking for you, Didier, if you could put the website of the organization, just type it into the chat section so they can follow up on that. So Joseph Mays is asking whether you could lay out a few key principles that are helpful to keep in mind to avoid repeating these mistakes in quote unquote reevaluating indigenous medicines. What are the lessons you've learned, at least?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I think most of the young people or not so young people that get either for the first time or have maybe taken some trips into the Amazon, it's difficult to know what's behind the curtain of this wonderful scene, playground that we find. People are very hospitality and there is a lot of joy among the children. Everything seems to be beautiful and wonderful and like to pronounce, but we don't always see what's behind this, and the current situation of the people are, in many areas we don't see many of these powerful shamans that anthropologists like you've talked about. We heard Jean Langdon talk about it yesterday, I think that was, and the young generations are not very interested in learning this knowledge, this practice, because how I'm gonna have to fast and to do this diet and retrieve from the social world, and young people have been pushed by their parents to become professionals, to study, to get a title, and also there's not much demand for that. It's interesting that the demand is actually outside now. While people are losing this culture, the Western world is trying to appropriate it, but without certain, I would say, conditions, how you can actually learn to do that. And it's very difficult to understand the language of the indigenous people about the way they have actually used this medicine traditionally for hundreds or thousands, we don't know exactly, of years, and why there are so few people that actually dare to walk on this path of knowledge and of the medicinal plants. So it's have a lot of patience, listen more than talk, and try to. I think basically what we can do is support people with maybe pointing in some possible directions, how, if they really want to reevaluate, renew their traditional medicine, but make sure that it is really something that people want to do, not for your convenience, to please you, or because you have the money to support the project, and that will help to put some gasoline in my outboard motor.
Another thing that I think is worth, you sort of mentioned it in passing, the fact that the young people who did enter the program were suddenly became suspected of being sorcerers, suspected of being witchcraft. And this is something that has also appeared in the writing of some of the books that Bia has organized about the globe, her many books about the global ayahuasca expansion, how the whole, the attack sorcery that is so common among the Shipibo, for example, the sort of cosmic battle between different shamans. A person who's sick, you automatically suspect they've been bewitched, or been attacked by daño, by sorcery. And so you return the daño and you kill the person who sent the daño. So there's this whole world of attack, sorcery, and retaliation that when ayahuasca travels into the sort of more touristic or whole new age circuits, that aspect sort of gets sublimated and pushed under and de-emphasized. And I think it's also a problem in these traditional health projects where this element, which is an important element of the ayahuasca, the milieu, the universe, it sort of gets pushed under the table. And maybe you could comment a little bit about that, about this, how sorcery accusations can disrupt these kind of projects.
Yeah, well, we started to ask the question of why reevaluate traditional medicine, and we said because certain things of the past were maybe left behind, no? And what you see, Glenn, you probably saw that happen is, that indigenous people most people didn't live in those so-called communities as they are today. They were, at least in the Amazon, in the Ecuadorian Amazon, the Shuar, the Quichua, and the Kofan and the Siona, Sequoia, they were extended, the families, groups who had their place, and then further 1 mile away there was another extended family group who had its settlement there. But they have been regrouped into these first reduction of the missionaries, the Jesuits, and then they had to come because there was a school there, so people you have to come and live, like properly, your houses have to be all aligned, and then you'll have access to water and this and this and that. And together with that, the culture has been eroding. And one of the things that I think I really noticed, because my wife's family is from one indigenous community about 10 miles from here, is that one of the things that has happened is people have slowly moved away from that connection that they had with nature, because, first because the resources have become depleted, the men don't have much to do to go hunting because there are not many animals in the forest. There's not much fish in the river, and they have to go to work to town to get some money. So what many aspects of these, the etiology of diseases that related in the past to the lack of fulfillment, the prohibitions that existed, the social norms that told people that you shouldn't do this at this time of the year, shouldn't cut that tree that way. If you have a baby, you shouldn't eat that kind of fish, and so on. So people have kind of moved away from this, and the regrouping of people in this community living very close by, that is has sort of intensified the social conflicts, because the chicken come into my house and your dog has eaten the eggs of my chicken and this and that. And so the accusations of witchcraft, I believe, are the result of this increasing social tension that people live in those villages, while in the past, when they had this very wide space and they were this, the culture was still very alive in terms of how do you negotiate the extraction of resources from nature based on this knowledge that the ancestors have left. When this has slowly has become forgotten, then the solution is always to blame the other for being the guilty one on your diseases or your bad luck or things like that, you know. And I think shamans today are more worrying or more warring. They used to fight for power in the past, and now they fight for money.
Yeah, yeah. And Joseph Mays has a follow-up question. He says, could you talk a bit about the cultural landscapes proposal and how it relates to the idea of biocultural conservation?
Well, the idea of cultural landscape is not my idea. It's some people for several decades have already been exploring the forest and finding that indigenous people have lived in this forest for much longer than we thought. Actually, it's supposed to, people are supposed to have lived in the Amazon basin for 11,000 years, but there are people, I think, in Brazil who are excavating archaeological sites in the Amazon and coming to 30,000 years of human occupation, which actually puts into question if our ancestors, the American ancestors, actually really came through the Bering Strait 15,000 years ago, because they couldn't have come so quickly down to the Amazon, no? And a lot of plants, especially plants, have been identified by botanists, ethnobotanists, who must have been planted by people for hundreds and thousands of years in the forest. They were perhaps, 10, 15 million people lived in this Amazon basin 500 years ago. So this interaction of culture and nature has influenced also greatly the architectural the architecture of the forest. Animals have contributed, because when you suck on one of these seeds of cacao, wild cacaos and other tree, then you just throw them around, and then the monkey come and they pick them up and they move them to somewhere else. So what they are actually showing is that this idea, this concept of the pristine, pure forest that where some Indians have habited is not really that what we thought 50, 100 years ago, and still many people today. It is a result of the coexistence of indigenous people with nature for thousands and thousands of years. So that brings this topic of bioculture, biological and cultural diversity, something that you cannot separate. They have evolved together at least for the last 10, 20, 30,000 years. And that brings a completely new, different vision of what is actually the Amazon.
Yeah, and I know, your talk was sort of pessimistic about the possibility of these projects working. And the point that you raise is very good, is that, a lot of the reason they don't work is because, we're here to do a health project. oh, that sounds good. And then the people are asking, what's health? What's a project? So there's a lack of communication. There's a lack of real understanding of what it is that these people understand for life. I mean, like you said, it's not about health. It's about life. It's about how you live a life in that forest. And I think, I mean, despite your pessimism, I would say that the Ametra 2001 project that you and Miguel Alexiades did in Madre de Dios in the 1980s was actually a very successful project in that I mean, you haven't been to the region perhaps in a long time, but those health promoters that you left behind, Zacarias and Solisonqueo, I mean, those people are still there, and they still, I mean, that was a very different project because you and Miguel were really committed to staying in the region and sort of a long-term presence. There was no, you guys didn't have a lot of money. You built that project on your personal connections, meeting people, training people, bringing people from outside to teach, and finding the local people who knew things. And that project really left a mark on that region and sort of revived herbal medicine, but it also sort of brought ayahuasca medicine into a new kind of renaissance in the region. And there are people who still make money at these ayahuasca ayahuasca tourism, the people who were trained or got interested at that time. So I think that is an example of a project that maybe it didn't achieve all that you wanted it to achieve, but it left a lasting impression because you and Miguel were really committed to the region, and you stayed for many years.
Yeah, well, that's nice to hear what you're saying. I also believe I don't want to be pessimistic. I'm trying to maybe I present it a bit dramatically, but I don't want to give up. I think I'll continue to do what I've been doing for 35 years until I can do that, and I still believe that there are possibilities. But it's important to understand that indigenous people have to find for themselves what they really want to do. They have to find for themselves what's this meaning of self-determination, autonomy, the rights that the United Nations have given them. But most of the people don't know what this really means, and only a few political leaders know about this. But in the community, this is not well known. So what we are actually, my wife is sitting next close to me, said, well, that's why I tell you, these leaders, political leaders, they have to go back to the territory. They have to go back to their community. They have to live with the people, and they have to do the work there, not just go out on the street to the capital, to the administrative offices of the government, because we know that the government, most of the Amazonian government, are not very interested in what we are talking about today, to say the least.
Yeah. So Camilo Rosselli is asking, what's the role of the Ecuadorian state in these projects, and how is the relationship between indigenous communities and the state in this specific subject of health reevaluation?
Well, in 1999, the indigenous movement, the Ecuadorian indigenous movement is known as a very powerful movement. They have achieved a lot of things, important things, apparently. So in 1999, they wanted the proposal of intercultural health to be integrated into the government offices of the health department, and they wanted to have intercultural health policies dictated and applied on the ground in all the health posts everywhere in the indigenous languages and so on. So there is this interesting playground where a lot of things seem to have been happening, seem to be happening. The people of the formal health system speak with words that they've learned, that we respect the cosmovision of indigenous people, but Western medical doctors and people, it's very difficult for them to understand and accept. It's not that they don't understand, they don't want to understand. Basically, they have a lot of resistance, and there are some exceptions, but a very, very small minority of physicians, doctors, nurses Actually, nurses are usually pretty much more open because they are closer to the people. So there are some, the constitution gives the right to indigenous people to practice their medicine, that it's important and so on. But somehow the governments always end up, you know, speaking from above down below. And so ultimately, yeah, you would have to do this, but we have to look at the pandemic. What happened with the pandemic? You know, the
Yeah.
health government wasn't in a position to do very much, and I don't think they are still. And worse in the Amazon, where those communities here, you have to fly a bush plane to get there. You can't, or you have to drive a canoe for 2 or 3 days, and who is going to get there? So indigenous people, what they were saying, when is the government health system going to come and bring us some? But no, they said no. We don't have to expect anything because they don't even know what to do. So let's take our plant medicine. Let's people went back into the forest where they have these little cabins in the hunting and on their hunting grounds, and they just moved away from these communities, and they've just done their thing. And today in Ecuador, 16 of the 24 provinces are in confinement. You say confinados, you
Yes.
know. But you know, in the Amazon, nobody wears a mask, and they don't pay attention to the social distances. And well, you know, that sometimes seems to be a bit worrying. But in Ecuador, there hasn't been very much uh, death among indigenous people. So we don't exactly know why, but obviously there are a lot less people by square miles in the Amazon than there are in Quito or in Guayaquil. You know, that
Right.
could be one of the reasons.
So
So
Zoe,
working with the government with something we always do. We don't close the door, but we are not particularly expecting that things are going to change
yeah.
necessarily very soon. But we
So
continue to talk.
So Zoe Pearson or Person is asking about when you mentioned that shamans are fighting for money these days. Is that a global phenomenon or something that's more predominant in, say, Peru and Ecuador?
Well, definitely, where you know the touristic industry, shamanic touristic industry, as we all know, in Peru is very developed. I would say much more than it is in Ecuador or it is in Colombia. But definitely, I think I don't know in Brazil how it is. There is something of that that has to do with the contact between Western culture and indigenous culture, and how the people negotiate this interaction, this relationship, uh, which definitely brings certain material, financial benefits to people. And as you know, in indigenous cultures, peace and equilibrium is kept at a certain level as long as nobody accumulates too much power. And if
Right.
power is money, or if money is power, or materialism is power, then obviously this creates certain conflicts, jealousies, and that may increase a certain loss of peace and harmony in the villages, to the point that I know many of the shamans who decided to go on this path of becoming international travelers, they haven't gone back to their communities really. They visit maybe once in a while, but they live in town, you know.
Why do you think? Why do you think that as ayahuasca gets more popular in the rest of the world, it is getting or shamanism healing? Why is it that it's getting more popular outside the Amazon and less popular among the indigenous populations where it originated? What do you attribute that to? Or less
Well,
interesting?
here, at least here, you know, as we've always heard that shamans are people who are well respected, but feared too. So you have a son who wants to become a shaman. Your son is maybe, you know, this is a risky life that he's going to decide for. A lot of young people actually are decided to go for that, to attend the tourist, because they don't need to take 20 years of apprenticeship and so on, or go through all the discipline. So they'll go for it for the money, but they don't have definitely the training, the knowledge, and the power that their elders had in the past, you know. So people, because I was saying to you before that there is I believe an increase of social tension due to this accusation of witchcraft. And when a person is accused of doing witchcraft in the community, he's going to be punished. And he's going to be punished in different ways, but usually the way to be punished is going to be killed by another shaman. So who wants to become a shaman today in the Amazon when this situation is happening, you know? That's one answer. There may be other things too.
And how do you see the relationship between, I mean, what is, you mentioned that the people didn't know what health was. Health is something we say when we say salud, when we're drinking beer, to your health. What word would you use to, how would you initiate a dialogue about health in this kind of situation? What would be the indigenous concept of health that you think would be a more valuable way of approaching it?
Well, here in Ecuador, some intellectuals, indigenous intellectuals have worked this through for a number of years, and they came up with this concept of summa causa. Summa causa in Quechua is translated as good life, living well, life in harmony, and so on. And that's this concept of summa causa that was adopted by the 2008 Constitution in Ecuador as a new concept of, at the time they talked of development. Obviously, the way the government or the political party in charge of running the government for the following 10 years had his own idea of what that meant. But basically, what I remember asking many elders about the same question, you know, what is it for you, health? And what people would tend to always say, for me, they would say, and I had somebody translate into their own language, and they would respond, for me, health is to es vivir tranquilo, to live quietly, no tener problemas, not have problems. See what I mean by not have problems? Because if you believe that a lot of the possible illnesses or problems in general can come when there is tension, when there is fighting, when there is jealousy. So they didn't know about coronavirus, they didn't know about viruses, bacteria in general. You know, they believed in spirits, and spirits can be called upon to be good, favorable, to bring wisdom, to bring power, to support the peace in the community, but they can also bring other things. It all depends who calls them for what. So summa causa is the concept of health, and that's what I was saying at the end of my talk, that we separate everything in our culture. We have a Department of Economy, Agriculture, Human Rights, Environment, and the Health. They don't have that in indigenous culture. It's the whole way of life is supposed to be what tends to health, and what if something is not well done, or if something may happen that will sort of break that balance between the people, the community, the environment, that has to do with the relationship is not good somehow, either between people and nature. So that's concept of summa causa is what sort of incorporates the concept of health.
And I'm wondering, since you basically stayed through this horrible pandemic in Ecuador, what if any concepts did the local people have about this new disease, where it came from? Did they have any? Did they talk to you about any theory? I mean, there was Elsa Legru is a anthropologist based in Brazil, and she was in contact with the Huni Queen, the Kashinawa people that she works with, and they understood when she explained that it came from bats, you know, from China. They said, "Oh yeah, we know about that. Bats when you disturb bats, they can cause fevers and such. And so they developed a sort of indigenous reading of this illness being vengeance by the bats, the bat people, the tribe of bats for environmental disruption. I'm wondering if in Ecuador you heard any explanations or understandings or even treatments for coronavirus in the indigenous, in their way of understanding things.
Well, it seems that some people have come to also point to the possibility that the things that are happening in the world today in terms of destruction of the ecosystems that they are seeing happen next to them in their territories by the different waves of extractivism, oil, gold, and many and timber is somehow responsible for this. That some of the shamans have said that the spirits or guardian spirits of the forest are upset somehow. They are wanting to tell us something about this. But I also think that people hear lots of things from other people. They listen to the radio and things like that. So most of the people really don't know. I think they just believe that this is one of this is white man's disease, basically. The disease from outside. It's not something that they've experienced before. So that is something that comes from outside, and they relate it to the thing that happens outside, but that are these powerful forces that the summer feel are coming stronger and stronger to take away their land, their resources, and so on.
And so why don't you, I don't know, we're getting towards the end here. I think we have just a few minutes. Why don't you tell us something about your project, about the center that you're working at, and what you're involved in right now?
Yes, well, this project is an idea that actually was born in the early 1990s together with this concept of summa causa I was telling you, the concept of sumac alpa. Sumac alpa is the land of no harm, is a good territory, good land that produces an abundance of resources where people have access to lots of resources. And they sort of tied those two concepts of this land of abundance, of this land of no harm, and this indigenous concept of good life, life in balance, however that could be translated. They tied it up with the need to use the traditional knowledge, the knowledge that we have inherited from our ancestors to manage the forest, to live together according to the laws that our ancestors gave us. And understanding that a lot of this knowledge has been lost and some of it is still not lost. So what do we have to do? What can we recover from what is not yet lost, and how we can sort of wrap up this concept of a good land is only possible if you actually practice this traditional knowledge so that you will live well, you see. So this is a work that started in the early 90s in this part. It's a Peruvian border between Ecuador and Peru, the Curaray River. It's one of the greatest biodiversity region probably in the world, because it's next to the Yasuni National Park, next to the intangible zone where the people who live in voluntary isolation, the Taromenani and Tagairi, still are. And it's something that we are trying to, we approach this project, we call it Voices and Songs of the Forest, because we were interested in how the forest symphony sounds like, and how people with their traditional knowledge communicate with nature. So this communication between culture and nature through dreams, through particular songs, when this woman sings to the toucan bird, for example, because her husband is gone hunting for several days and is not coming back, and she started to worry, so she's calling on the toucan to go sing to her husband so that he comes back because she's worried. And many different ways, cultural forms of expressions that people have that show you that they talk to the forest. They don't talk about the forest. They talk to the forest. They talk to the river, to the fish. They talk to the spirits, guardians of the animals, and so on. So this is an example of what we all talk about today, this loss of connection of nature of our modern society relating to the ecosystem that are exploding and releasing these microbes, viruses that don't know where to go but in our body, human bodies now. When you have people who still live like that today in the Amazon, and the question is, what can we learn from these people? I mean, we're not going to come to live only in the Amazon as Indians, no, that's not the point. But what can we learn from these cultures who have maybe forgotten some things, but not all like us? We have lost a long, long time ago that connection with nature, no? So this is the work that we are trying to do. But as I was saying, it's not just about the relationship with nature and how beautiful it sounds like, and you can record it, and you can maybe access, present a proposal to the UNESCO to recognize the land and the culture of these people as a world heritage, which would be good for the protection of their land. That's one of the things we're trying to help them to do. But really, basically, try to live that, because again, it's a concept that some indigenous intellectual have worked out to try to stop, to reduce that process of cultural and biological erosion in the land of the Quechua people in Pastaza. But the concept is something that is abstract, you know. If you have to transcend that concept and make it into a life, a daily life, how do you practice this every day? But here we have a school where they teach people about the French Revolution, the Romans, and I don't know what. We have people who think that their children have to go to study to town because they need to become professionals, and when they go to town, they don't come back. And they usually end up turning other things than they were expecting. You have a health system, a Western medical system that imposes some things and that people are always depending more and more on. That is that the child has a little diarrhea, they take the child to the health post, they ask for a pill, they ask for an injection, this and that. Actually, indigenous people don't always follow the indications that the doctors give them, so they don't really practice that. It works. And they don't know, they've lost. So the idea is to how do you help people to recover? I am not an indigenous person. I'm not going to tell people what they have to do. They have to somehow find out for themselves. But again, we are trying to help them, pointing in some directions that they might want to go. If they really want to go, it's their decision. We are not going to work such a project for our own satisfaction, because we're going to win a prize of UNDP or something like that for the good work that we do. We're not interested in that. We are not interested in recognition. We are trying to learn from so many years of work that we've done in the Amazon and see if with that knowledge we can support the people the way we feel that outsiders like us can support the people. And obviously we need money, there's no doubt about it, and we need financial resources to do that. How to support the governance, many of the people, unfortunately nowadays, after 4 or 5 decades, you see the leaders of these organizations, they need support. They need to have somebody else explain to them how they can make like a plan for the year, how they're going to do what and what, things like that, that they are not used to this format of living with these political things, issues. They have to go to this office and do this and that. And the day-to-day politics kind of end up like, they kind of drown into these things. And and forget that they have other things to tend on the day-to-day with their people in their community instead of being going from one government office to another. So that's one of the things we want to support, a real intercultural education process based on what people live in the territory, on the land, how they can learn biology, they can learn all kinds of things. They can record the sounds of the forest with the, highest technologies that can help them to identify through sounds what species are actually sounding and how they can manage their territory. The young people are interested in those kind of things, to protect more, to manage their resources, how they can reinstall a series of norms. They have to fight against Peruvians riding up the Curaray River in big boats and taking thousands of turtles and killing the dolphins and taking all the fish and sawing down all the big Uchuputo sabo trees. It's amazing what's happening. Nobody's doing anything. It's the border. It's the people come and go and they destroy in the national park. How do you do that? Well, you have to help them to get some of these nice little cameras that can spot those guys, and then you have to talk to the government. When are you going to help to stop the Peruvians from stealing the resources of the Ecuador? No, you better do that before another war starts between both countries.
Yeah. Well, listen, Didier, I think we're right up at our time limit. I think the next session is starting very soon. Once again, it was such a pleasure to see you again and talk with you and reconnect after all these years. I see Daniela Peluso was in the group here. Hi, Daniela.
Hi, Daniela. Yes, it was a beautiful story. Our story that make us meet in Madre de Dios. Thank you, Glenn, very much. And again, thank you to Chacruna, and hello to Kathleen Harrison also, I can see here.
And I hope to see you in Ecuador after this horrible pandemic ends.
Yeah, please come and see us. We'll have a roasted fish for you waiting.
Sounds wonderful. Okay, thank you, Didier.
Okay.
Merci.
Bye-bye.
Au revoir.
Hasta pronto. Au revoir.